Welcome back, everybody, to the channel. Today is Tuesday, July 21st. We are now 105 days away from the November elections. That is not that long. That's less than 3 months away, 3.5 months away. So, if, anyone who tells you that this thing is not right around the corner is lying. Today, what we're going to do is break down the 2018 midterm elections. As you see here, this is the 2018 Senate map that we were dealing with in the midterms. The midterms saw the highest midterm turnout in history, as you can see by the sheer amount of votes that were cast for both parties. Obviously, one party received far more votes than the other. I apologize for the sort of claustrophobic nature of the video here, as you can see how this part of this is cut off, but to make sure I got the entire map in here cleanly, I had to cut down on some of the space of the video here. So we're going to get into this. We're going to move a little faster than we usually do in the videos. We're not going to break down every single race in deep detail, but what we are going to do is compare them with some of the data that we're seeing now heading into the 2020 election. So let's get into it. This is obviously a map that favored the Republican Party. Now, while it at face value looks like it was a great year for the Republicans, at least in the Senate, it actually kind of wasn't, because even though they gained 2 seats, the reality is they flipped 4: Florida, Missouri, Indiana, and North Dakota, while they actually lost 2 in Arizona and Nevada, and they failed to flip in Montana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. And so that's, sort of an underachievement on their part. So let's break it down. Obviously, in the state of Washington, Maria Cantwell had no problems. Same with Dianne Feinstein. The Republicans didn't even field a second candidate, though it is kind of interesting how Dianne Feinstein, didn't win, considering she's such a well-known senator. 45%, almost 46% of the vote went to her opponent. Now, in the state of Nevada, Donald Trump was actually leading in the state of Nevada on Election Day in 2016, but as it's been commonly discussed, and as we have discussed here on this channel, Republicans are always overstated and overestimated in the state of Nevada. Dean Heller was sort of a, inconsequential, let's put it, incumbent, and he lost by about 50,000 votes. To Jackie Rosen. And this race wasn't really called until like 2 or 3 in the morning, the next morning on election night. And this was a big result for the Democrats, because going into that night, they had already lost these 4 states. And so they were sitting at a 55 to 45 situation in the Senate with 1 seat that they were basically renting in Alabama. So they were in a pretty bad position in the Senate, but they managed to kind of start their recovery with Jackie Rosen out here in Nevada. This was also a state that saw a flip on the gubernatorial level, as Steve Sisolak was able to win. Alan Laxalt was not the incumbent, but the Democrats also picked up this governorship. So this was one of the 7 states that we'll get into over the course of this video that flipped their governorship. But this was a big one for the Democrats to not only get the Senate race here, but also the governorship. So they kind of hit a double there on that one. Now in Utah, obviously nothing to really discuss there. Mitt Romney was never going to lose that race. But in Arizona, though, this one was not called until several days after the election. Martha McSally, who was already not a very popular candidate, was running against Kyrsten Sinema, a bisexual female Senate candidate, which is not something you would necessarily think is going to be too popular with voters in a state like Arizona. But nonetheless, she won, and she ended up winning by almost 3 points. She ended up winning by almost 60,000 votes. And if you just look here at this state, right in here, Maricopa County, which is one of the more conservative urban areas in the entire country and happens to be the fastest growing county in the world, or in the country, pardon me, Kyrsten Sinema was able to carry this. You contrast this with the governorship race here, in which Doug Ducey was able to win. He won by a lot more, and sure enough, Maricopa County he won, and he won by almost 200,000 votes over David Garcia. So clearly, on the Senate level, could it be possible that voters in Arizona are hoping to implement a little bit more of a check on Donald Trump. Because remember, this was, of course, John McCain's state, a man who Donald Trump has very little respect for, has a lot of disdain for. And so, even though Doug Ducey is known as a very avid Trump supporter, it is worth wondering if the Senate level, and this was something that we discussed on the Montana Senate election in our previous Senate election video, that this could be the source of voters' concerns with the current president and whether or not his sort of unchecked power in the Senate is something that they want to see be sustained. And so Kyrsten Sinema winning this race may have had something to do with that. State of New Mexico has shifted very far to the left. You can see this is not a very close race. Although, of course, Gary Johnson was able to capture over 15% of the vote, a man who wasn't really getting that much attention for the fact that he actually did run for the Senate and did get over 100,000 votes. But nothing really to discuss there. Same in Wyoming. One of these days in these videos, we are actually going to discuss something that happened in Wyoming, but there's really no need to right now. Now, this one was very interesting. Jon Tester winning in the state of Montana. This was a state that the Republicans threw a lot of money at. They definitely wanted to unseat Jon Tester. This was a tough retention for the Democrats, and as you can see, they were pretty much on defense because these were two of their really only pickup opportunities. You look elsewhere here, they had a shot at Texas, and then if they just hung on to their other states, it could have been possible. But in the state of Montana, they managed to play successful defense here with Jon Tester winning by about 18,000 votes, which in Montana is good for around 3 points. He defeated Matt Rosendale, who was now running for governor against, what was he running for governor? I believe he's running for, no, he's not. Pardon me. He's running for the House seat here, the lone House seat. The Republicans' gubernatorial candidate is Greg Gianforte, who currently holds the House seat. Missoula, typically a very liberal bastion in the state of Montana, went blue for the Democrats. Billings, one of the only major urban areas, if you even call that urban, went for Matt Rosendale. Helena, the capital, went for Tester. Great Falls. So you see these towns went for Jon Tester. And that suggests, of course, this was a state that Donald Trump won by over 20 points, but Steve Bullock, who's now running for the Senate, he won the state also on election day. So Montana continues to be a state that the Democratic Party can have some success in. And Jon Tester, I think, gave Steve Bullock a little bit of a blueprint as to how to win in this state. And so that was a huge retention for the Democrats to win in the state of Montana, and a pretty big disappointment for the Republicans that this is a state that can still elect Democrats. And do not be surprised if even in a state that goes for Donald Trump by 20 points in 2 different elections, do not be surprised in the event that this state has 2 Democratic senators and even possibly a Democratic governor, although the Republicans are in a little bit better shape in that race after this election. Now, in the state of North Dakota, this was a state that the Democrats for a long time had quite a presence in. Of course, Kent Conrad, a longtime Democratic senator, represented the state for many, many years. Heidi Heitkamp, continuously won as the underdog, but as you see here, she lost by 11 points to Kevin Cramer. And, notably, this is kind of one of those states that has the Senate, able to flip power in a certain way. I mean, this was a state that not even 400,000 votes were cast. And in an election in which one party received almost 20 million more votes than the other, this can still end up being a net positive for the Republicans. So North Dakota went for Kevin Cramer, just as Missouri, Indiana, and Florida did for their respective candidates. And in the state of Nebraska, Deb Fischer was able to win here handily, no problem. Now, in the state of Texas, this is one we need to break down. Beto O'Rourke, of course, this is one of the most popular races, one of the most consequential races. Beto O'Rourke was known as a very upstart young candidate. He visited all, I believe it's 254 counties in the state of Texas. Obviously, down here, the Latino portion of the state was always going to go for Beto O'Rourke. El Paso, his hometown, he over tripled Ted Cruz. I'm not sure why the percentage is different there, but he basically tripled Ted Cruz's output there. One in the city of Dallas, as almost all Democrats do. Fort Worth, in fact, which is a very conservative area, at least for an urban area, he actually managed to win. So you could see how Texas potentially is shifting. Harris County down here won by a bigger margin than most Democrats do. Austin, around the same as El Paso, and the neighboring counties. Got down here a pretty populated county, Jefferson County, out here where Galveston is. Um, and so Beto O'Rourke was able to capture a large portion of the vote in what is normally a very Republican state. And he lost by about 215,000 votes. And, all the while, this is more evidence of the fact that the state of Texas can appear to be shifting from right to left little by little. And of course, Joe Biden, as we know, is basically in a tie right now with Donald Trump in Texas. And so even though this could have been a scenario in which it's a very unpopular incumbent being challenged by a very popular House member who ran a great campaign, the reality is he still lost. And so if the race is skewed in the Democratic Party's favor that much and they still lost, it might mean that the Republicans are still in a better position in Texas than people might realize. So while this was obviously a great sign for the Democrats to come that close in a Senate election, the reality is it wasn't enough, and it's still probably not going to be enough. I get why there's a lot of noise about Donald Trump potentially losing the state of Texas, but I still don't think it's going to happen this time, although we could see numbers similar to this, with Joe Biden receiving over 4 million votes. Okay, let's zoom back out here. In the state of Minnesota, now this has been a state that the Republicans have sort of let slip out of their grasp. Obviously, they were never going to defeat Amy Klobuchar. She's beloved in the state. You can see even in counties that are generally pretty red out here in the western portion of the state, she was able to win those counties, and the Republicans didn't even clear 40%. And of course, in a very liberal area like Minneapolis, which if anything is shifting even further to the left after the events surrounding the George Floyd murder, that is only going to help the Democratic Party as minorities continue to be charged up and vote in 2020. So Tina Smith, however, in the special election had a little bit harder time. The Republicans were able to clear 40%, and as you can see, these counties out here that are obviously very unpopulated but went for Amy Klobuchar did not go for Tina Smith, and Hennepin County, which there it is, went for by a smaller margin. So, and Duluth also by around the same, but still a smaller margin. Why it says St. Louis? Not totally sure, but regardless, Tina Smith, who was up again for re-election, that is going to be a little bit of a challenge for her, but she's probably going to be just fine. You also add in the governorship race here. Tim Walz won by about the same margin as Tina Smith did, suggesting that the more popular, well-known establishment candidates in the state of Minnesota will do pretty well. And so that serves Tina Smith well, because if she wins, which she's expected to do for the second time in 2020, that is going to give her a lot of clout, a lot of consistency within her own voting population, and I think her constituents will respect her as a result. Now in the state of Missouri, this was a little bit of a surprise on Election Day. Not that Claire McCaskill lost, but that Claire McCaskill lost by the margin she lost by. She lost by about 6 points. The last few polls on Election Day had her, if not all the way in the lead ahead of Josh Hawley, basically tied with him. And so even though the margin kind of narrowed up on election night itself, the reality is throughout election night, this was not a very close race. And of course, 1.1 million votes, the vast majority of those came from St. Louis City, where not the vast majority, but the biggest portion of it came from here, where she received 96,000 votes compared to just 15,000 for Josh Hawley. So the reality is now this is a state that has been not really as safe for the Republican Party as many will make it out to be, because these three urban areas will vote for Democrats and a couple surrounding counties. And as a result, that will push the Democrats into better positions than they would otherwise be. You would otherwise think, given that the rest of the state, as large as it is so unpopulated. And so Barack Obama, of course, came very close to winning the state of Missouri in 2008. And so it's worth considering, um, what could the Democrats, in on the presidential level, have any chance here? Now, of course, there is a governorship election here. Mike Parson, the current governor, is not a very popular governor. People are not too pleased with his handling of the coronavirus pandemic, but he's probably still going to win. So Missouri is kind of an interesting state to keep an eye on as a potential bellwether, and Claire McCaskill, having tightened this race up and losing by just under 6 points, while not a close race, wasn't as big a blowout as it was made out to be, even though, of course, as I said, leading up to Election Day, we expected her to do a little bit better. Now, in the state of Wisconsin, this was obviously one of the most watched states on election night, because this was one of those 3 states that was shocking. You look here across the Rust Belt: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, or Michigan, Wisconsin, rather. These were all states Donald Trump won, and basically handed him the Electoral College victory. In the state of Wisconsin, the Democrats were really hoping for some good results here, and they got some. Tammy Baldwin, a popular incumbent, won by 11 points, by the way. She even won here in Brown County of Green Bay, which is normally a pretty conservative area, but she blew the margins out in Madison, as all Democrats do, and in Milwaukee as well. So Tammy Baldwin, it wasn't really too worrisome for the Democrats for her to win, but she won, and won comfortably. But the governor race, however, this was a big one. This was really the one that they had on their radar, because Scott Walker is obviously one of the most well-known Republicans in the country, and he lost by about a point to Tony Evers. Of course, Scott Walker was able to flip back Brown County, so clearly this you had some split tickets here. The margin in Madison was a little bit lower. The margin in Milwaukee was a little bit lower. So Scott Walker, even though he ended up losing to Tony Evers, he lost by obviously a lot closer, and so this was obviously a huge night for the Democrats. And then, of course, there was that special Supreme Court race election earlier this year that the Democrats won. They were not favored to win that race. And so those 3 different things are what give the Democratic Party, combined with good polling, a lot of hope in the state of Wisconsin. Because the Cheat State is known for being kind of on a knife's edge, and if anything, tilting a little bit to the Republican Party as unions in the state continue to dissolve little by little. So those 2 races were huge results for the Democrats, and that combined, or those 3 races, if you count the Supreme Court race, there was also a state Senate special election in Wisconsin real early, I believe in the first year of Trump's term, that went in the Democratic Party's favor. Now, they went 2 for 2 there, really 3 for 3, counting the Supreme Court race. In the state of Michigan, there were also a governorship and a Senate race there. Debbie Stabenow was facing a kind of a stiff test here from John James. She won. You could see her 53% to 46%, just about. Whereas in the governorship race, another one the Democrats lit, 53 to 44%. Bill Schuett didn't even come close to defeating Gretchen Whitmer, who was a little bit of a polarizing governor, and of course is someone who is known to be, or at least for a little while, was known to be a potential vice presidential candidate for Joe Biden, which we're waiting for news on basically any day now. So the Democrats have gone 4 for 4 to this point in these midterm races. In the state of Ohio, another state that the Republican Party was targeting, Sherrod Brown, the incumbent Democrat, was targeted by James Renacci, and Sherrod Brown took this race home and won by about 300,000 votes. Blowing out the margins in Cleveland, a little less in Toledo, Akron, Columbus, even Cincinnati, which is kind of right up there with Phoenix as being one of the more conservative liberal areas in the United States. So while the Democrats have lost 4 seats here, in these 4, the Republicans have also missed on a couple opportunities here in Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, to a lesser extent Minnesota, and of course Montana. Now in West Virginia, Joe Manchin, while this may seem like a complete shocker just because West Virginia is such a red state, the reality is Joe Manchin is about as conservative a Democrat as you will find in politics. He's pro-life. He is pro-Second Amendment. Um, well, I shouldn't say pro-Second Amendment. He's just he's very closely aligned with the Republican Party on gun issues and gun ownership. In fact, I would say Joe Manchin is more conservative than some Republicans are. And so while the Democratic Party is very happy to have him, of course, and at least continue to have a presence in the state after Jim Justice, another very moderate Democrat, decided to switch parties, the reality is Joe Manchin, as you can see here, who won a lot of counties in the state that typically vote red, even up here in Wheeling, which typically votes red. The reality is um, uh, Joe Manchin, is somebody that the Democratic Party cannot necessarily count on votes that they are particularly passionate about. Of course, Joe Manchin voted to confirm Judge Brett Kavanaugh, even though there was a lot of speculation. I'll leave it for you to decide if because by that point the confirmation was basically a guarantee, and so by that point it was just people were wondering if he was just doing that to try to save himself in an election year, and if that was the case, it ultimately worked. So the Republicans have actually missed on some of their best pickup opportunities, other than North Dakota and I would say Indiana being their best opportunities. They've also missed here on West Virginia, Ohio, Montana. So they're Democrats. While they lost 4 seats and gained 2, they've also played some pretty good defense in other areas. In Virginia, they were never going to lose there. They were never going to lose in Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. These were all easy wins for them. New York, the same thing. Vermont, Bernie Sanders wasn't going to lose. Angus King, there was a little bit of speculation that he could potentially face a little bit of trouble, but as you can see, it wasn't even close there. So the other pickups and they also held, of course, in Mississippi. The special election, which is we're seeing again here this year, was a lot closer, as Mike Espy came rather close to defeating Cindy Hyde-Smith. Of course, that Mike Espy is running again against Cindy Hyde-Smith, but I would imagine Cindy Hyde-Smith will be just fine. Tennessee, Phil Bredesen, I mean, this is a pretty indicative thing here. Phil Bredesen lost by over 10 points here, suggesting that, if Phil Bredesen can't win in the state of Tennessee, one of the most liked Democrats, nationally, I mean, he didn't even carry Chattanooga, didn't even carry Knoxville, was able to win Nashville by a big margin and Memphis, but clearly this wasn't going to be enough, and the Republicans clearly have flipped the state of Tennessee for good. Now in the state of Indiana, of course, this was a state that Barack Obama won in 2008. Now Mike Pence, that factor, this went back to Mitt Romney in 2012. It went for Donald Trump, resoundingly. Mike Braun able to defeat Joe Donnelly by about 6 points, which is a good result for them. As you can tell, in the state of Indiana, a state that the Democrats are beginning to get a little bit of a bigger presence in just by virtue of Pete Buttigieg, who I think, even though he's established himself as sort of a new rising star within the party, it does give you some hope if you're the Democrats, and it makes you a little concerned if you're the Republicans that could boost the Democratic Party's position in the state of Indiana just a little bit. But the Republicans pretty much just took care of business here in the state of Indiana, and we know that there was some frustration just based on articles that were released shortly after the election that they were able to flip these 3 states very easily, but didn't even come close really, or came moderately close in West Virginia, Ohio, and Montana, states that they were very, very bullish on in terms of their chances of flipping. All right, the last state we're going to break down here was the state of Florida. Now, this was a little bit of a surprise. Bill Nelson, while he's sort of known as, for lack of a better term, just kind of a weak politician, he's not a very charismatic, enthusiastic politician. He's very vanilla. He's been in the Senate a long time. And he, in Florida, of course, if you're a Democrat, you need to be relatively moderate. And as you can see, this was a shockingly close race here. 0.2 of a point separated Rick Scott and Bill Nelson. Rick Scott won by just 10,000 votes down here. As you can see, all the major urban areas went blue. Even Jacksonville, which is known to be a pretty conservative area for a liberal, or for a urban area, Miami by a big margin. Palm Beach by a big enough margin, Broward County by a huge margin. That's, of course, home to Fort Lauderdale, Tampa Bay by smaller, Orlando, and, of course, Tallahassee. Now, the reality is, for the Democratic Party in the state of Florida, this was a state that they were really focused on, not just in this race, but also in the governorship race, where this was a state that people were very focused on in 2018, because this, on the governorship level, because Ron DeSantis, who was a congressman from the state, was running against Andrew Gillum, the mayor of Tallahassee. And this was a very divisive and very hotly contested race that Ron DeSantis was able to win by about 33,000, just under 33,000 votes, or 4/10 of a point. And Andrew Gillum's career has suddenly taken a bigger turn for the worse. But as you can see here, even down here in Monroe County, home to Key West, for crying out loud, Ron DeSantis was able to carry that, while Bill Nelson was able to actually carry. But if you look here, this is basically, can you look at that? He won it by 16 votes. So some of these areas in South Florida didn't go for the Democratic Party by as much as they needed them to. And so these two races, after the whole issue with the Parkland shooting up here in Broward County, there was a lot of activism in the state. There was a lot of philanthropy in the state. And after it went for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton, people expected this to flip blue, and for Bill Nelson to win, for the governorship to flip blue, and for Bill Nelson to hold off Rick Scott. Well, they didn't do either of those. Now, they did flip a couple seats down here in the House, in the South Florida area, and there was also the passage of Amendment 4, which gave over 1 million convicted felons the right to vote again, even though the state legislature in Florida has been tinkering with that little by little. So this would give Donald Trump a reason to be more optimistic about his chances to retain the state of Florida, because let's face it, if Donald Trump loses Florida and it's 29 electoral votes, he is not going to be president in 2021, whereas Joe Biden will be. So, that pretty much would solidify Joe Biden as the presidential candidate with the likeliest chance of winning. Of course, he's also considerably ahead in the polling down here in Florida right now. One state I completely forgot to mention here was Pennsylvania, another state that had two statewide elections. Bob Casey, the incumbent senator, won easily. And then Tom Wolf, who for a time was sort of rumored to be a vice presidential pick, he also won, and very easily, over Scott Wagner. And so some of these areas, what's interesting about this state is that oftentimes the counties hold true pretty much every time. On the president, this pretty much looks like the presidential map. However, Erie, voted for Tom Wolf by a huge margin, over 20 points. Pittsburgh by a big margin. Philadelphia, one of the most liberal areas in the country. Look at that margin, 87% for Tom Wolf. Scott Wagner didn't even clear 15% in Philadelphia County. And of course, surrounding counties are also very, very safe for the Democrats. So Allentown as well. So, the Democrats were able to win these. So, as you can see here, they flipped the governorship in Nevada, New Mexico, Kansas, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Maine, while losing it in Alaska. But the point is, in these three states that Donald Trump won, where the election was basically given to him as a result, the Democrats won all 6 statewide races, and some of them were not that close. And so that is what is giving the Democrats a lot of optimism. They also flipped a couple House seats in these states, and as we mentioned, in the state of Wisconsin, managed to flip that Supreme Court race. So that is what is giving the Democratic Party hope. Of course, in other states, in the state of Kansas, where they flipped the governorship, Laura Kelly defeated Chris Kobach by 5 points. This is also the scene of the crime in 2020, because Chris Kobach is pissing off the Republican Party and running for the Senate again. And he's being challenged by Barbara Bollier, a former Republican, who is currently leading against Chris Kobach. And just imagine, the Republican Party, who are already in tough positions defending in Arizona, Colorado, Montana, North Carolina, Maine, and Iowa on the Senate level. Of course, Iowa, which went a certain way, that you can see how much closer it was there. If they have to start defending heavily in Kansas, they're in a lot of trouble. So, I think the Republican Party on the Senate level is in for a spanking potentially in 2020. Of course, the 2022 map is even less favorable for them, so that's worth keeping an eye on. So thank you guys so much again for watching this video. Please, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. We are nearing 1,000 subscribers. That would mean so much if you guys could do that. I appreciate all the support and the viewership you give me. Please comment down any suggestions below, and I will be sure to try to make a video detailing any questions you may have and answer them for you backed up by data, of course. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.